everyone, and welcome back to another episode, as I take you back to the 20th century in Europe, Sweden, where a Polish man was convicted of 3 murders. Stanislaw Gonerka was born on June 7th, 1927, in Poland. He had a tough childhood, and as a teenager, he was forced to work for a German farmer during the Nazi occupation of Poland. From 1944 to 1945, he was imprisoned in the Leslaub labor camp. In his 20s, he trained to become a master butcher. Before that, he had worked as a police officer, where he claimed to have seen the torture of prisoners, but it's unclear if he participated in it himself, according to police interviews from the 1970s. In 1958, Gonerka moved to Sweden. While working as a butcher, he got into trouble with the law for several crimes, including serious theft and drunk driving, which led to his deportation back to Poland in 1962. In 1972, he returned to Sweden and became a Swedish citizen. However, that same year, he committed a violent robbery against an elderly man in Helsingborg, using a rubber baton to hit the victim on the head multiple times. For this crime, Gonerka was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison. A psychological evaluation in 1973 described him as someone who could easily deceive others and was generally untrustworthy. After being released from prison in the autumn of 1974, Gonerka had met a woman through a personal ad. On August 22, 1974, a tragic event occurred when 38-year-old Wanda Radosh was murdered at her home on Hyacinthgatan 4 in the Holma area of Malmö. After visiting a dance restaurant, Gonerka killed Radosh and dismembered her body. 2 days later, on August 24th, children playing near a garbage container on Sorgenfrivägen 47 in Östra discovered 2 human thighs wrapped in plastic. Earlier, some kids had reported finding body parts, but their parents had not taken them seriously. Eventually, some suspicious parents called the police around 3:30 p.m. The bloody package stood out in an otherwise clean container. A forensic expert noted that the dismemberment was done skillfully, with limbs cut off at precise locations. About 40 police officers quickly began investigating and soon focused on Gonerka as a suspect. An envelope with names and a car number led them straight to him. The evidence suggested that the dismemberment was carried out by someone with professional skills. Gonerka was located at a square late at night on August 25th, where he had gone to retrieve his car. He was drunk and didn't resist when the police arrested him. During his first questioning, he admitted to being involved in Radosh's murder, stating that they had met at a restaurant and later went to his apartment. The police believed they might have known each other longer. In his apartment, they found the torso and arms of Radosh, while the lower legs were discovered in a container nearby. After confessing to the murder, Stanislaw Gonerka fainted. When he was questioned again, he clearly explained what happened. The murder took place in his apartment, which he had cleaned very carefully afterward. Radosh's throat had been cut just below her chin, and there were no signs of strangulation on her neck. The police found her torso, along with her arms and part of her neck, on his balcony. Gonerka had planned to get rid of the body later. He took Radosh's legs in his car and dumped them in a container far from his home to hide any evidence. He could not explain what happened to her head, which was missing. On August 27th, the Malmö police identified Radosh using X-ray images from a hospital where she had previously been treated. Radosh had lived in Malmö since 1969 and had known Gonerka for a while. He claimed he had hit her when she suggested getting married. When Radosh stopped moving, he became frightened and realized she was dead when he couldn't feel her pulse. Gonerka was very upset and struggled to explain why he had dismembered her. On August 28th, Chief Public Prosecutor Aki Sandberg asked the Malmö District Court to keep Gonerka in custody. He was initially suspected of serious assault and causing death by negligence. During further questioning, Gonerka changed some of his earlier statements. He admitted that he had hit Radesh harder than he first said, and that they had fought intensely. However, he insisted that her death was an accident. The main court hearing began on October 18, 1974. A thorough psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which was completed in February 1975, right before the trial resumed at Malmö District Court. The main charge against him was murder, with another charge of causing death by negligence. On March 11, 1975, Gonerka was sentenced to psychiatric care for aggravated assault and causing death by negligence. In spring 1977, he was declared wanted after escaping from St. Siegfried Mental Hospital in Vassio during a visit to relatives in Poland. He didn't return to the hospital and was arrested a few months later for new crimes in Poland. Although he had obtained Swedish citizenship a few years earlier, the Polish police sent him back to Sweden on a ferry without notifying Swedish authorities that a murderer was being returned. On August 12, 1977, Stanislaw Gonerka killed Rut Norinder and Arthur Andersson at Damgatan 38 in Ystad. Norinder owned a small guest house in Ystad, and Andersson was a close friend who often visited and helped her with tasks. She lived just a few hundred meters away from her guest house. On August 13th, the Ystad police received an anonymous tip from a woman who was worried because she hadn't seen her friend, Norinder, for several days. Concerned for her safety, the woman asked the police to check on her. That evening, the police searched Norinder's apartment and also looked into Andersson's place since he was missing too. However, they didn't find anything suspicious, so they didn't take any further action at the time. On August 15th, the police searched the apartments again because neither Norinder nor Andersson had been seen. They also started reaching out to their families for information. Around 11 a.m. on August 16th, a neighbor of Andersson called the police to report that an unknown man was in Andersson's apartment. The police rushed to the scene and found Gonerka trying to escape. He claimed he was a crew member on the Polish ferry Scandinavia, which was supposed to leave at noon. However, the police quickly discovered that the ferry was not in port, so they began to question him more thoroughly. Eventually, he admitted that he had been at a party with Andersson and Norinder on August 11th. When the police searched the outbuilding where the party had taken place, they found Norinder and Andersson dead. The scene showed clear signs of a violent crime, with bloodstains indicating how they were killed. After finding the bodies, the district prosecutor in Malåhus County, Leinhard Allison, announced that Gonerka was in custody. Gonerka denied the murders, but the evidence against him was strong. At the time of his arrest, he had Andersson's keys, a postal savings bank book with a small amount of money, and a porcelain figurine in his pockets. During his first questioning on August 16th, he revealed that he had arrived in Ystad on July 26th. While he denied killing anyone, he did admit to having coffee with Andersson once. On August 19th, Gonerka was formally charged by the Ystad District Court with the murders of Norinder and Andersson, as well as theft. The court proceedings were held privately, and Gonerka continued to deny the charges. At that point, the police had not yet found the weapon used in the murders. On November 14th, 1977, the Ystad District Court found Stanislaw Gonerka guilty of murder. He was sentenced to continue receiving psychiatric care in a hospital. In November 1983, Gonerka was released from Sidsjön Hospital in Sundsvall, just 6 months before the murder of Katrine da Costa. The day after Katrine's dismembered body was discovered, the police received a tip about Gonerka. He did not have an alibi for the time of the murder. At that time, he lived in Södertälje but frequently travelled to Stockholm, where he bought meat and cut it up in his apartment to sell to friends. When questioned by the police, Gonerka strongly denied ever contacting a prostitute. However, several women from the prostitution area on Malmskillnadsgatan in Stockholm recognized him as someone who visited often. As the investigation progressed, attention shifted from Gonerka to a forensic expert named Tiet Harm. After experts voiced their concerns about the evidence. Over the years, the police received multiple tips about Gonerka, but they showed little interest in him. After Katrine da Costa's murder, he was interrogated twice, but since he had no alibi, the police never searched his car or apartment. During the interrogations, he mentioned a friend who had driven him to the city, but the police never followed up on this lead and did not record the friend's contact information. Some people close to Gonerka repeatedly said, "Something terrible has happened" in his apartment, but these tips were ignored by the investigators. The forensic pathologist who examined Gonerka's victims was Gerhard Voigt. A few years before his death in 2008, Voigt expressed frustration over the lack of an investigation into Gonerka during the da Costa case. He wondered why Gonerka wasn't investigated more thoroughly, especially since he had noted that the killer showed a good understanding of anatomy during the autopsies of Gonerka's victims. In a 1999 book by Per Lindeberg titled Döden är en man, he pointed out that the murder in 1974 was very similar to the one in 1984. He highlighted a specific detail in how Wanda's body was dismembered, noting it had a remarkable similarity to how da Costa's remains were treated, particularly how the necks were severed. Stanislaw Gonerka died on February 20th, 1987, 3 years after da Costa's death. He was buried on March 12, 1987, at Botkyrka Cemetery in Botkyrka Municipality, just south of Stockholm. In October 2007, a formal complaint was made to the Chancellor of Justice about how the police handled the initial investigation into the suspected murder of Katrine da Costa. The complaint focused on the DNA testing done on hairs found on a towel near her body. One of the investigative leads involved testing these hairs using mitochondrial DNA, which was then compared to samples from Stanislaw Gonerka. To gather evidence, there were attempts to obtain a sample from Gonerka through a pathologist at Karolinska Hospital in Huddinge. However, they were told that a court order was necessary to proceed. On February 12, 2009, the chief public prosecutor at the Vasteroid Local Public Prosecution Office in Stockholm decided not to request a search warrant for Gonerka's tissue sample stored at the Karolinska University Laboratory. After a review was requested, the Deputy Director of Public Prosecution at the Development Center in Gothenburg decided on March 23, 2009, not to change the initial decision. However, on April 20, 2009, Anders Perklev, the Prosecutor General of Sweden, decided to take over the investigation and change the previous decision. He believed there were valid reasons to issue a search warrant to obtain the tissue sample to see if it could link Gonerka to the case. The Prosecution General then transferred the case to the Chief Public Prosecutor at Södertörn Local Public Prosecution Office in Stockholm. The prosecution applied for a search warrant at Karolinska University Laboratory to access the samples. On April 30th, 2009, the District Court approved this request. However, after the hospital appealed, the Svea Court of Appeal overturned the District Court's decision on May 22, 2009, and denied the prosecutor's request for a search warrant. The Court of Appeal rejected the prosecutor's request to seize the tissue sample in the investigation of Katrine da Costa's death. While the prosecutor argued that there was strong public interest in the case, they could not provide clear evidence that obtaining the sample would help the investigation or clarify suspicions against anyone. The court ruled that the prosecutor had not shown enough legal justification for this action, and that the potential intrusion into Gonerka's rights was too great. As a result, the district court's decision was changed, and the request was denied.